All right. Yes, thank you so much for joining us. Can you please introduce yourself and your relationship to CCJ?
My name is Randy Yohn, and I guess I could say that I'm a victim. I've been a victim, actually twice.
Mm.
My relationship with CCJ, though, actually goes back to the very beginning. My wife and I were contacted, and I'm taking a guess at this year, about 1978,
Sure.
following a burglary that we had in 1976. The person was apprehended, and some recovery was made on some items, and we were approached by Howard Zayer and a guy by the name of Lonnie Berge with the probation department at the time, to see if we wanted to participate in a new program that they were looking at called the Victim Offender Reconciliation Program. And since I was in law enforcement, they thought probably that I would be a good person to try this program. This would have been the first time an adult offender would have been in the Vorp program. So we agreed upon that, and actually my wife and I decided that we would want to have the interview actually in our home, the place that actually that he broke into. Now we're talking about a couple of years later down since the burglary took place. So we met with the offender's name was Harry Fred Palmer, which has got a place in history all of its own in Vorp. And we met with him, and he was, and we went through the reconciliation program. He agreed to making some reimbursements, apologized, talked about he had just gotten back from Vietnam, and he'd been involved with drugs, and he had a new wife and some young children, and just wanted things that other people had, and thought that he could go steal them, I guess. So that's where that started. Not too long after that, Howard Zayer and contacted me to see if I'd want to sit in on trying to see whether Vorp could become a program, and I agreed to that. So I guess I was at the very first meeting where we talked about formalizing the Vorp process. From there, we developed a board. At some point, I think at that point, Howard was being supported by the Southside Mennonite Church. He was an employee there, and that's where the funding was coming from to run Vorp. We decided that we needed some administrative support, and so we joined up with an organization called Michigan City Pact, Prisoner and Community Together. They had established a number of years before and ran some similar programs, had administrative support for us, and so we became Elkhart County Pact, a subsidiary of Michigan City Pact. From there, we continued to grow our programs. At that time, Vorp was the only program that we were offering. We continued to grow our program, and at one point, we decided that we wanted to go out on our own. So we separated from Michigan City Pact, and Al Wingard at that particular time took over as the executive director, and continued to grow the programs, adding a number of other programs, mediation programs, community service programs, as that continued to grow. I served as the board chair for probably 6 or 8 years until I ran for sheriff in Elkhart County and was elected. And then I had one of my other deputies fill my spot on the board. So that's then I kind of got away from it for a while because I had other things on my mind, being sheriff. But then a number of years after that, the board came to me and asked me, after I had retired, came to me and asked me if I would want to be the executive director on a part-time basis for community justice, which I accepted. That would have been in about 2016, maybe 2006, I'm sorry, and served in that position for a year and a half. So that's kind of how I got involved with it, my overall involvement with it. So I've been engaged for a long time, not nearly as close here in the last couple of years.
Sure, yeah, but you bring a lot of insight in terms of CCJ historically and its impact on the community, but also from a personal angle. So I'll probably touch on all of that. So starting off sort of the personal angle, as a victim of the crime that you mentioned, what did you personally get out of the Vorp process?
Well, that I think we began to see Mr. Palmer as an individual, a person with problems that went far beyond the burglary, and as we go through the history of us with Fred Palmer, he had actually was going to be sentenced by Judge Bontrager in Elkhart Superior Court 1, and that was when the state of Indiana had had mandatory sentences, and Judge Bontrager felt that him going through Vorp and the reconciliation program, that prison time didn't suit Mr. Palmer, so he vacated his sentence, I believe is probably the proper word for that. And as time went on, then the state came back on Bontrager and said, you can't do that. And Judge Bontrager ultimately lost his seat as a judge over that case. Another Judge Pro Tem was brought in and sentenced Fred Palmer back to prison for, I think, 2 years following that. And I had actually had gone to him and surrendered him to the law enforcement so he could be returned to prison. So, and it continued after that to the point where actually when I ran for sheriff, Fred was out handing out campaign literature and putting up signs for me. So I think that made a full. Now I've lost track of him, but as far as I know, he has not repeated any of those offenses and went on, I think, in the RV industry as a salesman. So, but that whole Fred Palmer thing ended up in a book that Chuck Colson had written called Loving God, and it's highlighted in his book.
Okay, thank you.
It's a big, long story. We were involved in it, and I think in the long run, as far as he was concerned, I think the program was successful for him and for us as well.
Yeah, it sounds like beyond just the original encounter, it sounds like you built a good rapport and relationship with him.
We had. Now we were a victim again later on in about 95, where some people broke into our house. That one didn't end up quite so successful. We met with that offender. He made some restitution for some damage. They didn't take anything in our house. In fact, he was captured following the burglary in our house. And he chose a life of crime after that. And we're still getting notices from the Department of Corrections that he's still involved there. So I guess that one didn't go quite as well.
Okay. Yeah. So can you talk about in terms of how you see Vorp holding offenders accountable? How do you see that? How do you see this process and restorative justice broadly as holding offenders of crime accountable for their actions?
Well, I believe the program does a good job at that. In over the years, great number of people have gone through the process, and a lot of them think that the process works well, holds them accountable, and recidivism is, of course, is what we're trying to reduce. I think it has a good record of that. So I think in our case, it held Fred accountable, and in the other case, not quite so much.
Mhm.
I believe that we don't win them all, but in the percentage of things, I believe that the programs are very successful here in Elkhart County, and have had a lot of spin-offs nationwide for what we're doing here too.
Yes, it's definitely started like a national movement in terms of restorative justice in the United States. Yeah. And I'm sure that's been really interesting for you to see, both as someone who worked here and also got our services. I'm wondering if you can, sometimes people, when they hear about restorative justice, they automatically say it's like soft on crime, that it's not doing enough. I'm wondering, both from your perspective as somebody who has that history with CCJ, but also in law enforcement, what your thoughts are on that in terms of that argument.
Well, I've heard that argument a lot, and I guess being sheriff, people ask me about that process.
Mhm.
I don't think Vorp works for everybody, but I think there's a number of people that it does work well and is successful. So I think over the years I've walked that line of not being too soft on crime. I like the people that are that involved in violent crime, certainly through the justice system, do some time. I don't really think the prison system works real well for a lot of people. When you talk about rehabilitating folks, but those that find their way into the alternative programs seem to have a higher success rate than those that actually go to prison. So I see both sides of it, and like to think that I've participated in both and created some opportunities for people to succeed and not go to prison.
Okay, so you see the Vorp process of not only repairing the harm and creating reconciliation, but being a good alternative to prison systems, and that they help offenders in different ways.
I just truly believe that.
Great. Yeah, so what else would you like to say about the role of CCJ in terms of its impact on the Elkhart community?
Well, having been involved with CCJ, being involved in our community since basically 1978, that's a long track record of providing services. I know, having been sheriff, having been clerk of the county, and now on the county council, and we actually provide some funding for CCJ to continue those programs. We see a value in it. If we didn't, we wouldn't be providing funds, but we just recently gave them $100,000 for another year, and see them as a partner in the justice system here in the county. Not just another program, but a true partner in providing services. So I think there's a real value in that, and I think that they'll continue to provide that service for quite a while, I hope.
Good. Yeah, just lastly, why would you encourage people to use CCJ services?
Well, I think it's sometimes you got to talk people into going through the reconciliation program. Your first thoughts when you're a victim is you're angry, and then you want to get some revenge, or you want somebody to pay the price. And then when the folks at CCJ explain that you can actually be a part of that process and have some self-satisfaction out of it, I think that's what makes this thing work so well. And And I think the victims have to be open-minded to participating in alternative programs, that we can't jail them all. We can't afford to jail them all. And jailing a lot of people doesn't do a lot of good. In fact, maybe it creates career criminals in the long run. So I just think people need to give this a try, even if at first blush it doesn't look like something that they want to do. But and it's not easy sitting down with your offender, but when it's all said and done, I think there's a lot of satisfaction that comes from it.
Thank you. Yeah, is there anything else you want to add about CCJ that I didn't ask you about?
I probably gave you a lot more than you asked for.
No, I appreciate it at all. All right, great. Well, thank you.
Well, it was good to see Ann Lehman the other day at the council meeting, and I hadn't seen her for a long